Hey there, Booktube, welcome back to my channel. When Robert over at Bardo Hordes first floated the idea of a Booktube prize where just regular booktubers would have a hand in judging and deciding which book from a certain time period was the best of those new releases, he asked people who would be interested in judging such a prize, and I said right away, yeah, I'd be interested. And over the months that have passed since that initial request and announcement, the Booktube prize has gained a lot of traction, a lot of interest, and it's finally time for me to judge a round of the Booktube prize. I assume that a lot of other booktubers have expressed interest, which is why it's finally time for me to judge. I'm going to be judging the quarterfinal round of the Booktube prize. Robert has sent me the ballot, so I have 6 books that I'm going to be reading in order to judge this prize, and over the rest of this video, I'm going to tell you how I feel about each book as I read them and tell you at the end which of these books I'm going to rank first and which of the books is my least favorite of the 6. So stay tuned for my thoughts on the 6 books that I'm reading for the quarterfinals of the Booktube prize. I'm going to be judging Group D of the quarterfinals, so the 6 books that I'm going to be reading in order to decide are Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, The Great Alone by Kristin, The Incendiaries by R.O. Kwon, The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris, The Book of M by Peng, and West by Carys, Davies. And I finished one book. I finished Where the Crawdads Sing last night, early this morning. Delia Owens' novel. Throughout the read, I thought I was going to give it 5 stars. At the end, I'm saying 4.5 stars. Oh, there is so much to love and also so much to hate about this book. It gave me complicated feelings. I cried, I laughed, I empathized, I felt remorse, I felt sad, I felt hopeful. I love the poetic inclusions in this book until just at the end. I finished reading Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is the first book that I'm reading in order to judge the Booktube prize. It's an unusual story about a young girl. She's 7 years old when we meet her. Her name is Kia, but everyone seems to call her the Marsh Girl. That's because she's growing up on the North Carolina coast. Her parents have a shack on the coastline, and while when we meet her, she's living with her parents and her siblings. Her father's very abusive, and eventually her mother leaves, and then one after the other, all her siblings go. And so at first, Kia finds a way to coexist with her father, but after a while, even he leaves, and so she has a very unusual childhood in that she grows up mostly alone. And even when she's taken and slightly encouraged to go to school, she doesn't feel like she fits in. The kids tease her, and so she spends most of her time at home, growing up on the North Carolina coast and learning about life from observing nature, from collecting and creating this awesome collection of things that she finds on the beach. Because of these unusual circumstances and the characteristics that she develops in order to deal with her situation, she becomes at once very eccentric but also very appealing. And eventually her isolation is broken because one young man and then another both come into her life and try to help her for one motive or another. And the story develops because of her relationship, the relationship that develops between her and these 2 young men. There is an alternate timeline in the future where we see that one of the young men is killed and Kia is being investigated as a suspect in the murder. And through a series of moving back and forth, we see the arc in these characters' development, but we also see the comeuppance of some of the decisions that they make as young people, how it affects them as adults. There are poetic inclusions that reflect a lot of what is going on in Kia's life, and there are also snippets of what she's writing, because as she's collecting these items that she finds on the beach and tracking and studying things and doing this fantastic research that seems to be way above the abilities that she should have for not having gone to school and getting a formal education. Time that she spends in the marsh makes her an expert, and I love the way it is talked about. I love how literary the book becomes, even though it's also a study of nature and relationships. It's also diving into science, and we get to see science, how science is reflected by just the study and sometimes the complete devotion of a person's life to studying something. And so I love that part of it. I don't love how the book ends, although I could see how it was going there. I was a little disappointed when it ended, but that is not enough to detract from my high rating of this book. I love the way Kia's character develops. I love the choices that she makes for herself. I love how she defends herself. I love that the fact that she's growing up alone doesn't mean that she's completely isolated from the world. I love the subplot where we get a tender relationship that develops between her and this Black family in the community, and how they protect her, how they treat her, how tender and generous and kind they are to her, and the feelings that develop, the emotions that we get to experience through their relationship that crosses racial and social and political barriers. I love it. Having read this as the first book that I'm reading for the Booktube Prize means that this has set a pretty high bar, and we'll have to see what the other books are like and whether something can top this one. So stay tuned. Meet Phoebe. The teenager is recovering from a lifetime of devoting herself to piano and finally recognizing that no matter what her mom said, she's never going to be as good as the greats. And one evening, Phoebe is driving and there's an accident. Her mother is killed. And how does Phoebe process the grief? By looking for a bigger purpose, a cause that she can sacrifice her entire life to. Her born-again Christian father hasn't been able to convince her about religion, but he has a more unconventional way of convincing her. He sends a gentleman to become a strong influence in her life. Meet Will. As a child, he witnessed his father abandoning the family, and he saw his mother go into a spiral of mental and physical breakdown, followed by increasingly desperate financial circumstances. Will, who's been raised to be a believer, asked God for a sign, but he's only received silence in return. And so Will has decided that he has to take his future and his destiny into his own hands, and he's going to devote himself to school and become enough of a success to take care of not just himself, but for his mother as well. But when Will and Phoebe go to college, they meet each other and begin this college romance, even though these two young people only have their fractured selves to offer to each other. But while they might be able to make a go of this whole romance thing, Phoebe also meets John Leal, the slightly older revolutionary with the Korean background that her father has sent her way to try to convince her about religion and becoming involved in something bigger than herself, which is exactly what Phoebe has been looking for. And Will, with his slightly atheistic beliefs, isn't really able to hold on to her no matter how much he thinks he loves her. Sometimes love just isn't enough. The novel is Kwon's Incendiaries, and in this one we get these three perspectives, one from Will, one from Phoebe, and one from John Leal, all showing the lead up to this act of terror, this act of violence that is committed, as they all seek to tell their own story in parts. But there is a focus on Will trying to understand how we got here, how we started, and what is the progression that has led to these events, and what he might have been able to do to prevent the explosion that we see pictured here on the front. While the focus of the personal investigation in this novel seems to be on this public act of terror, there are multiple acts of violence that happen as the novel progresses, and I really admire the way the author juxtaposed these two different kinds of violence, and how one was shrouded in secrecy and one was something that the public was investigating and everyone knew about. And she also set up this question that the reader should be constantly asking: which one ultimately is worse? Is the public crime worse than acts that are committed behind closed doors? And just because not everyone knows about what has happened, because multiple people weren't hurt, does it lessen the impact of what is done to even one victim? I liked a lot of things about this book. I admired the way the author delved into this act of secrecy that sometimes we can use to cloak our private acts, and sometimes the shroud of secrecy that we live under. How does it affect us, and how does it affect those who want to love us and those who want to share our lives? I like the fact that even though there is a North Korean mention that it's almost unproven, and so even that kind of mirrors the cloak of secrecy that covers that country, but also is represented in all the other acts of concealment that we see throughout this novel. So I liked how the author approached the themes that she wanted to bring in this novel and how she executed some of those plans. But ultimately I found this book a little bit wanting. I gave this 3.5 stars just because I felt like I wanted more. I liked the presentation, but I didn't feel like it offered me everything, didn't offer me all the resolution that I was hoping for at the end. So 3.5 stars that I could easily round up to 4, but I'm gonna keep it at 3.5 just to distinguish it from other books that I feel are a natural 4-star read for me. So The Incendiaries by Kwon. This is the second book that I'm reading for the Booktube prize, and right now it's somewhere in the middle of the pack for me. Let's see how it fares along with the books that I read next. Third book I'm reading to judge the Booktube prize is West by Carys Davies. I think this is how her name is pronounced. This is a debut novel because she's published 2 short story collections previously, but this one is amazing. It is 150 pages, 149 pages of kind of an adventure story. We meet Cy Bellman. He has a case of wanderlust. He's from England. He and his wife migrated to the United States because, of course, seeking better, greener pastures. And they established a mule farm in Pennsylvania, but wife didn't survive for very long. They had a daughter named Bess. And now that Bess is 10 years old, Cy has decided it's time to move again. This time he's going west. He's heard about the bones that have been found of these huge animals, maybe dinosaurs, maybe something like it, and inspired but also sure that he can beat the Lewis and Clark expedition because those explorers weren't able to find these great creatures. But Cy Bellman is convinced that without any training, even without proper maps, he could go west and find these great creatures. And so he leaves his daughter in the care of his sister, and he leaves his mule farm to be tended by his neighbor Elmer, and he packs up a horse, packs his dead wife's trinkets, even her blouse he takes along with him because he's gonna trade with the Indians, and he goes west. But before Cy Bellman made the decision to go west, an entire nation, an entire group of people was evicted from their land and sent west as well. And those, of course, are the Native Americans. The author doesn't go into their story explicitly, except to have one of their young men, a Shawnee young man named Old Woman at a Distance. That's what he's called, and he's the representative of his people. He is the young man who Cy Bellman meets and takes as an aide as he travels across the Mississippi River and to Kentucky and beyond. That's his goal anyway. But Old Woman at a Distance is a representative of the Shawnee people, and the intersection between these two people is really what fuels the rest of this book. It's 149 pages, so there aren't many details, but I think the author used this minimalistic approach very cleverly in that there aren't any confusing, obfuscating details. So the main characters emerge almost like out of a mist, out of a fog, sharing just what they need to give you in order for you to feel for them, emote with them, and feel caught up and start to root for them, even though we know that there is almost no way that this could end well. The author achieved, I think, almost perfectly a conclusion to show that chasing safety or peace or adventure, all of those are ideas that are just as fleeting, just as ephemeral as the idea that grass is always greener on the other side, or that going someplace will cure your want for adventure. If this was just a simple 5-star rating, I'd give this book 5 stars and I'd say that this was at the top of my list, but I still have 3 more books to read, so we'll see if something else tops this. I don't know. 3 more books that have been touted as great reads, so we'll see if this is still my #1 contender when I've read all 6. The Great Alone by Kristin. This is the fourth book that I'm reading in order to judge the Booktube prize, and I couldn't help while I was reading, couldn't help making comparisons between this one and Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And there are a lot of comparisons that I could make in terms of the plot, in terms of the main characters, in terms of the remoteness of where the characters live. But before we make comparisons, let's talk about this book on its own. The Great Alone is set, most of it is set in Alaska. We meet 13-year-old Lenny and her parents before they move to Alaska. Her father is a Vietnam POW or just a Vietnam vet. In any case, he's come back from the war broken, and he's abusive towards her mother and to her. But her mother excuses a lot of his behavior, reminds Lenny that he isn't the same now that he's come from the war as he was before, and she's in love with the idea of who he was before. And love means that you have to endure things from people, and so she endures his abuse. She puts herself in the place to absorb a lot of his rage, a lot of his frustration, a lot of the things that he finds wrong with the world. He takes it out on her. That's Lenny's mother. And so in her way, she is showing that she loves him by becoming his punching bag, becoming the person that will prevent him from taking out that rage on the world, and also from him taking it out on her daughter. And so in some weird twisted way, the mother, Cora, she thinks that this is her way of loving her daughter and sacrificing herself for her husband, but also for the world. Eventually, Lenny's father gets a letter that one of his fellow soldiers who had died in the war left him some property in Alaska. And so they moved to Alaska, this great unexplored frontier where they can have a new life away from some of the things that irritate and trigger her father, because the book is set in the early 1970s at a time when there's a lot of anti-war sentiment and people are afraid of the political situation and what it might mean for their lives, nuclear terror and just wars in general. And so they all flee to Alaska. But Alaska, the great unknown, is, while it does provide this refuge, some kind of freedom away from some of those things that they need to be away from, it's also a harsh environment, and it doesn't always reward people with the things that they're looking for. So one of the statistics that they hear is that 5 out of every 1,000 people who move to Alaska don't survive. They go missing for one reason or another. And throughout the story, there are constant reminders of all the ways that a person could die, and sometimes just being alive is enough of a triumph. And so they're meant to keep their expectations really low. Throughout the course of the novel, we get a juxtaposition of two men who are scarred by war as they try to defend or protect the women in their lives, or protect their country, or whoever they feel responsible for. So we get this comparison, this side-by-side comparison of two men who are scarred, and how the women in their lives love them, how they protect them, how they respond to their scars, and what they do, what they're prepared to do for love. One of the things that I really liked about the book was how the author presented this man versus environment theme, in the way that the land provided refuge, it provided sustenance, it provided escape, it also provided a means to survive and thrive, but in exchange it took so much from you. And there's a part in the book where she talks about how being in a place like this place in Alaska where they live, this remote place, how it reveals who you are, not who you thought you were, not who you want to be, not who you've been told you will be, not who you plan to be, but who you are innately. How this environment reveals the harsh reality of your character. And I like the way she presented that, but I had a really hard time with the mother in this book, with the things that she allowed her daughter to endure. I had a real hard time with the violence, and it was just difficult for me to keep reading this mother, Cora's constant refusal to acknowledge what was happening and the excuses that she made for her husband, for his abuse, for why she stayed. The fact that she knew that her daughter would never leave her, even when an opportunity presented itself, that she knew that her daughter would never choose to leave her behind because she was afraid, and that she constantly put her daughter in harm's way in order to say that she loved her husband. It angered me, it enraged me, and it brought me to a point where no matter what happened after that, I felt like I couldn't excuse her actions, even if she made a complete 180. But I admired some things about the daughter. I felt real compassion for the way she grew up and how she was able to find her own understanding of what love meant, even learning from such poor examples from her parents. So I liked some things about the book, other things I didn't. Ultimately, I settled with a 3.5, but I rounded it down to 3 stars because as much as I could dwell on the things that I liked, I didn't feel like this was a 4-star book for me. I had trouble with some of the pacing. I felt like some of the things that we dwelt on, especially in the early parts and the middle of the book, I felt like some of that could have been condensed a little bit to make this a slightly smaller, slightly more readable book. At 440 pages, not much happened in the middle of the book to really justify the length. So I'm giving this 3 stars. I don't think that maybe this author is necessarily for me. I liked some of the nature aspects, and I don't mind reading a book that shows nature. And some of the characters in here, I felt like they were well developed and well rounded, but others I just had real problems with. And so 3 stars from me for this one. I just finished reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is the 5th book that I'm reading in order to judge the Booktube prize. And this one, it says right here that it's a novel, but it's really the biography of someone who was in Auschwitz, and this is the tale of his survival. He's 25 years old, from Slovakia. The call goes out that every family is required to send a representative to volunteer or to enroll, and because his brother has children, he has a wife and kids, and they wouldn't send his father, he volunteers. So his name is Lael, and he's taken on a cargo train, cattle train kind of, and none of the men know where they're going. They end up in Auschwitz, and a man called Peng, who is the tattooist, takes a liking to him, and so he takes him as his apprentice, and their job is to tattoo the numbers onto people who are just coming in to the concentration camp. And after not very long, Peng disappears, and so our main character Lael, he becomes the head tattooist, and over time he's given privileges. He's able to share some of those privileges with his fellow prisoners, people who've been kind to him, and well, he starts off being kind to them, and then when his situation becomes a little bit more desperate, or when he needs favors for himself or for the friends that he has made, he's able to cash in on some of those kindnesses that he gave out. And there's a lot to like about the story. The fact that when he is here in Auschwitz, he meets a young woman and falls in love with her. And so there's a romance and a love story going on in the midst of all the horrors that are happening at Auschwitz. There is some kind of relief from the terror that you're reading about, but this is something that I find with books that are based on historical events, books that are written that are supposed to be novelized versions of real people's lives. I feel like the author kind of paints themselves or writes themselves into a box where, because they want to be true to the story, they no longer write like it's a novel. So this one didn't read like a novel, it read like a biography. So there was a lot of telling, not showing. It felt like an article, a report that we were reading about this man's life, as opposed to a story, a novel, where I needed more traditional novel format. So I like the story, I just didn't like the novel as much as I wanted to. There's some things about the story that you can tell the author is trying to make concession to the person whose life she's honoring with this book. And at the end there is an author's note where she describes the encounter that she had with the real life Lael and how he entrusted her with his story at the end of his life, feeling some kind of reclamation, feeling some kind of guilt for having survived where so many others didn't, you know, after maybe 50 or 60 years of living with that experience, and feeling like maybe he was just too lucky to find the woman that he loved and be able to escape both of them and spend their lives together. And so I felt like there were places where the author stopped being a novelist and became a memoirist, and I feel like the novel suffered because of that. Just the novel itself, the fiction itself, just didn't ring true. I mean, it doesn't say at the bottom that it's based on the powerful, true story of love and survival. I get it. I thought the book as a memoir, as a biography, would have been just so much stronger. And so in that case, it wouldn't have belonged here. And so reading and judging it for a prize where other works of fiction, works that have been created in a fictional storyteller's mind and presented on the page like this, can't really compare with those other things. And so for that reason alone, I can't rate it as highly as I would other works of literary fiction that are totally created stories. The last book that I read in order to judge this round of the Booktube Prize is The Book of M by Peng. And this is a dystopic reimagining of a fairy tale. You know how they say someone is so irresponsible they would lose their very shadow? Well, that's what happens in this book. We have characters who have become disconnected from their shadows, and the shadow is what contains a person's memory and therefore their essence, their identity. And so after a person becomes shadowless, they become almost unknown and they can no longer function in the society with their loved ones, and so they're chased out. Even those who love them can no longer be around them. And so we have this dystopic world that is set up because we have the shadowed and the shadowless, and both groups are really fighting each other. There's a quest to survive, but even more, there is a quest to go to the south because there is hope there. There is one person who's referred to as the one who gathers, and the hope is that he'll be able to reconnect people with their shadows. And so everyone is trying to go there. The shadowless who are not content to be shadowless and want to be reunited with their former selves, as well as their loved ones who are hoping for their former loved ones to become the people that they once knew so that life can go back to normal. This book is illustrated by several characters, and one of the things that really bothered me was the fact that each one of these characters had multiple names, but it's one of those things that bothers you throughout the whole book, but it eventually becomes kind of reconciled in the end. So one of our main characters is Orlando Zhang, and for most of the book he's referred to as Ori, and when he joins a group he becomes General Zhang, but he is married to Max, and when we meet them, they're holed up in a hotel because they were at this hotel for a wedding. Their friends were getting married, and this is when the world changed, and a lot of the people who were at that party stayed in the hotel seeking shelter until some of them became shadowless and left the hotel for one reason or another. So when we meet them, Orlando and his wife Max are the only two inhabitants left in the hotel, and Max has just lost her shadow. Ori is afraid to leave her, but eventually he has to go scrounge for food and supplies. And while he's gone, Max leaves. She takes with her a tape recorder where she's planning to record her messages to him because she is heading to the south. She's trying to find this person who can help her recover her shadow and become again Ori's wife. So throughout the course of the novel, we have these two main characters, Ori and Max, who are on different sides but all headed towards the same place. They are trying to meet up with the one who gathers. How did this all begin? We had a man named Hemu Joshi who is Indian. He was the first person to have lost his shadow, and the one who gathers is an amnesiac who lost his memory from other causes, but because of his alliance with Hemu Joshi, the amnesiac both becomes patient zero and the hope for those who are trying to recover. But all of that happens in the middle of this really long novel. It's almost 500 pages, 482 pages, I think, in total. And there's a lot that happens in here. It is literary in that there is a connection between this dystopic world that we're living in the United States, and now defunct United States, and these characters all traversing through very magical ways, trying to get from one part of the United States to another. But it's also linked to the fairy tale, the Peter Pan story, where there's a plot line in Peter Pan apparently where he lost his shadow and was eventually reunited with it, but also an Indian myth, well, two Indian myths, one of a woman who was married to someone that she couldn't really be with and still remain herself, and so she disconnected her shadow and left her shadow in her place so she could go live a different life, kind of like a clone. And then there's another Indian fairy tale where there's an elephant who is capable of not just retaining his own memory, but can also share memories with other elephants that he hasn't even met. I thought it was really clever the way the author took those other stories and was able to structure her dystopic retelling around that and incorporate it. But I felt like there were places in the middle where a lot of the violence that she used to show the transition from one place to the next, I thought some of that could have been condensed. So ultimately, I'm giving this a high rating because I liked the literary value, I liked the connection between all the stories, but it also had some faults for me. So for me, this was a high rating, but not perfect. So somewhere around a 4-star. So now that I've read all 6 of the books, I'm going to tell you how I rated them. So I came up with a rubric of 6 questions, and I'm going to be asking myself about each one of these books. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how I rate the book in each of these characteristics. Each book could get a point value ranging from a minimum of 6 to a maximum of 30 points. 6 questions I ask myself. First is it literary? Are there references to other works, whether fiction or non-fiction, that are mentioned in this book, and are they tied to the story in some way? The second question is about social commentary. Are there political or historical references that the author incorporated in the narrative? The third question is whether the book is allegorical. Do the characters represent something bigger than themselves, or were they limited to just being characters illustrating a story? The fourth question is readability. Was this book a page turner? Was it one that I struggled to put down because I was so immersed in the story, or not? Question number 5 was about pacing. Did the novel progress smoothly, or did it linger and dwell on something and become boring at points? And question number 6 is whether this book is something that I could recommend to other people as a drop everything and read book. For Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, for the first question, was it literary? I gave that a 4 out of 5. Social commentary, I rated that 3 out of 5. Allegorical, I said that was 3 out of 5. Readability, page turner, definitely, that was 5 out of 5. Pacing, 4 out of 5. And would I recommend this to other people as a drop everything and read? 5 out of 5. So Crawdads earned 24 out of 30 points for me. Moving on to book number 2, The Incendiaries by R.O. Kwon. Literary, I said that was 2 out of 5. For social commentary, I gave that 5 out of 5 because I think the author did a really good job in comparing personal violence that is inflicted from one person to another person that's close to them, and showing the link between that and large-scale violence and terrorism as a whole. For allegory, I gave that 4 out of 5. Readability, I said that was 4 out of 5. Pacing, 4 out of 5. But would I recommend this to other people? 3 out of 5. So the total tally for Incendiaries was 22 out of 30 for me. West by Carys Davies was one of my favorite books. I said that was literary, 3 out of 5. Social commentary, 4 out of 5. Allegorical, 5 out of 5. Readability, 4 out of 5. Pacing, 5 out of 5. That book was so short, it didn't have time to dwell on anything. And would I recommend this to other people? 4 out of 5. So the total tally for West was 25 out of 30. The Great Alone by Kristin, I gave that 3 out of 5 for literary content, 4 out of 5 for social commentary, 3 out of 5 for allegory, 4 out of 5 for readability, 3 out of 5 for pacing, and 3 out of 5 for would I recommend this to other people. For The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris, I didn't think that that was really a novel. So literary value, I said that was 3 out of 5. Social commentary, I gave that 5 out of 5. Allegorical, 3 out of 5. Readability, 4 out of 5. Pacing, 4 out of 5. But would I recommend this to other people? Just 2 out of 5. So the total tally for The Tattooist of Auschwitz was 21 out of 30. And The Book of M by Peng Shepherd, literary, I said that was 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 for social commentary, 4 out of 5 for allegory as well as readability. Pacing, I said that was 3 out of 5 because there were places where it just droned on. But would I recommend this to other people? 4 out of 5. So the total tally for The Book of M was 23 out of 30. And so each one of these books was only separated by a point. There were places where I had to split the difference just because the point values were so close. I don't know, maybe this rubric I'm gonna have to change it a little bit when I judge the next round. But when I put all these numbers together, my favorite book, the highest score was West by Carys Davies. Crawdads was my second favorite. That got 24 out of 30. West got 25 out of 30. The Book of M, 23 out of 30. And my bottom three, the Incendiaries, 22 out of 30. The Tattooist of Auschwitz, 21. And The Great Alone, 20 out of 30. And so that's how I rated the 6 books that I had to read in order to judge the Booktube prize. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you agreed with me in how I rated these books and whether you think this was an effective way to judge. It got very difficult because I really like some of these books. There were a couple of them that I knew while I was reading them that those were my least favorites, but there were 2 that were pretty high up there, and it was hard to judge between them. But I'm looking forward to judging the next round. I'm going to be judging the semi-final round, so I'm looking forward to that. If you're new to hearing about the Booktube prize, links in the description box down below where you can go crazy and watch all the videos about the Booktube prize. It is a fantastic opportunity for booktubers to have a hand in judging book prizes, and I'm so happy. Thank you so much, Robert, for allowing me this opportunity to judge not just this current round but the next round. I'm so looking forward to reading again and judging some of the, well, I've already read some of the books that are in the semi-final round that I'm going to be judging, but I'm looking forward to rereading them because some of them I read a long time ago. I read them last year, and I feel like I need to read the books currently in order to judge them fairly, because, you know, if you're reading a book now, you may be swayed by reading something currently. So I'm planning to reread all the books in order to judge this next round. But give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more. Let's talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.